You don't steal 12 feet of a man's land by accident. The excavator bucket hit the fence post at 6:12 that morning. Metal screamed against metal. Cedar boards snapped. A flock of blackbirds burst from the trees as if the whole field had fired a warning shot. I came through the back door wearing work boots, jeans, and half a jacket. Cold Virginia mud splashed my ankles as I ran toward the eastern boundary of my property. The air smelled of wet clay, diesel exhaust, and fresh-cut cedar. One of my father's trees was already down. Its roots pointed toward the gray sky. Orange paint dripped across the trunk like a wound. "Shut it down," I yelled. The excavator bucket stopped moving, but the engine kept growling. A construction worker in a yellow vest looked at the clipboard in his hand, then toward the white SUV parked near my field. Diane Whitmore stepped out before he could answer. She wore cream-colored slacks, polished boots, and a wool coat that had probably never touched real dirt. Her blonde hair stayed perfectly fixed despite the wind. In one hand, she carried a rolled survey map. In the other, a paper coffee cup. She walked toward me like she was arriving at property she already owned. "Mr. Warren," she said, "you're interfering with authorized HOA work." I looked past her. Someone had stretched yellow string along my field. Fresh wooden stakes stood every 50 feet, each topped with orange ribbon. The line cut through my cedar trees, crossed the drainage ditch, and ran directly beside my workshop. I had known that boundary since I was 9 years old. My father had walked it with me every spring. He would carry his brass level under one arm and point toward the small copper markers buried beneath the soil. "Wood rots, Caleb," he used to say. "Paint fades, but a true line stays where it was put." I stared at Diane's new stakes. They were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not the kind of mistake caused by an old map or a careless contractor. They were 12 feet inside my property. I stepped toward the nearest one. Diane moved in front of me. "The county corrected a historical surveying error. Cedar Hollow Estates now owns this strip. This land has been in my family for 34 years, and records can be updated." Her voice was soft, almost friendly. That made it worse. Behind her, workers began unloading concrete forms from a flatbed truck. A sign on the side read "Western Gate Expansion." That was when I understood. Cedar Hollow had been trying to build a second entrance for months. Their existing road was too narrow for the 42 luxury homes Diane wanted approved. Without access through my eastern field, their expansion ended at a drainage ditch and a wall of cedar trees. She didn't want 12 feet. She needed them. I crouched beside the nearest orange stake and pressed my fingers into the mud. Diane sighed behind me. "If you damage an official marker, you could face criminal charges." I ignored her. 2 inches down, my fingernails scraped metal. I cleared the soil slowly until a round copper cap appeared beneath my hand. Mud filled the stamped letters, but I could still read the surveyor's license number from 1989. The original marker had never moved. The new stake stood exactly 12 feet beyond it. I took out my phone and photographed both markers in the same frame. Then I noticed the tire tracks. Wide tread, clean edges, still filling with rainwater. They ran from the disturbed boundary straight back to Diane's white SUV. Her smile tightened. For the first time that morning, she stopped looking confident. I stood, wiped the mud across my jeans, and looked at the excavator, the broken fence, the fallen cedar, and the perfectly measured line of stolen ground. Diane thought she had arrived with a map powerful enough to move my property. She had no idea the real survey was still beneath her boots. And before this was over, those 12 feet were going to cost her entire board everything. I waited until the construction trucks disappeared before I touched the fallen cedar. The field went quiet again, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. Diesel smoke still hung over the grass. Fresh mud clung to the orange stakes. Somewhere inside the workshop, rain tapped against the metal roof with the slow patience of a clock. I wrapped a chain around the cedar trunk and pulled it clear with my old Ford. The roots dragged across the ground, carving a dark scar through the clay. My father had planted that tree in 1991. I was 10 years old, skinny as a fence rail, carrying a shovel twice my size. Frank Warren stood beside me in faded work clothes, showing me how wide to dig the hole and how loose soil needed to be around the roots. "Trees and boundaries are the same," he told me. "Ignore them long enough, and somebody else decides where they belong." At 10, I thought he was talking about gardening. At 44, I finally understood. Our 18 acres sat beyond the eastern edge of Cedar Hollow Estates, where polished stone mailboxes and identical lawns gave way to pasture, hardwood trees, and the low workshop where I built fences for a living. Dad had bought the property in 1989, before Cedar Hollow existed. Back then, there was only a narrow county road, 2 dairy farms, and enough silence to hear deer moving through the trees at dusk. He never trusted memory when measurements were involved. Every deed, receipt, permit, and survey went into a gray steel box beneath his workbench. After he died, I left it there. Opening it felt too much like admitting he would never come back to organize it himself. That afternoon, I finally pulled it out. Dust coated the lid. The hinges groaned. The inside smelled of machine oil, old paper, and the faint tobacco scent that had clung to Dad's jackets. Beneath tax records and faded invoices, I found the 1989 boundary survey. 7 copper monuments marked the eastern line. The coordinates matched the cap I had uncovered beneath Diane's new stake. Attached to the survey was a yellow notebook filled with Dad's handwriting, distances, drainage elevations, fence post counts, and small sketches of the creek bend. Then I found his brass level. The wood was dark from years of use. One corner was chipped where I had dropped it while helping him rebuild the southern fence. I ran my thumb across the scratch and heard his voice as clearly as if he were standing behind me. A fence is only honest when the line beneath it is honest. I carried the survey outside. From the workshop door, Diane's plan became obvious. The stolen strip began at the county road and followed my boundary for nearly 600 feet. It crossed the drainage ditch, passed between 2 cedar rows, and ended beside the unfinished western section of Cedar Hollow. Without those 12 feet, their new entrance led nowhere. No legal road connection, no utility corridor, no emergency access for the 42 homes they planned to build. I walked to the ditch and opened Dad's notebook again. His elevation marks showed something else. The drainage line beneath Diane's proposed road carried stormwater away from Cedar Hollow and into the creek. Any pavement, retaining wall, or buried pipe placed there would require my permission and a county review. She had not moved the markers because of an old mistake. She had moved them because the truth made her project impossible. As the sun dropped behind the trees, I noticed fresh orange paint on another cedar trunk. Then another. A dozen trees had been marked for removal. At the bottom of the nearest trunk, someone had stapled a work tag. Western expansion, clearing begins Monday. It was Friday evening. Diane had given me 1 weekend to surrender land my father had spent a lifetime protecting. I folded the survey, picked up his brass level, and looked toward the white rooftops of Cedar Hollow. She thought she had stolen 12 feet. What she had really done was show me exactly where to start measuring. Diane came back Saturday morning at 9 sharp. I heard the tires before I saw her. Gravel cracked beneath the weight of her white SUV, followed by the softer hum of a black sedan carrying a man in a navy suit. The air smelled of cold coffee, damp cedar, and the sawdust I had swept from the workshop floor an hour earlier. Diane stepped out holding a leather folder against her chest. The man introduced himself as Martin Bell, counsel for Cedar Hollow Estates. His handshake was dry and brief, the kind of handshake that said every word spoken afterward might appear in court. "We're here to resolve the boundary issue professionally," he said. Diane smiled. She had replaced yesterday's mud-stained boots with polished brown leather. Not a single trace of the field remained on her. I led them to the workbench, but did not offer coffee. Martin opened the folder and placed a document in front of me. Boundary correction and emergency access agreement. The paper was thick. The HOA seal gleamed blue at the bottom. Colored diagrams showed a clean strip of land running from the county road to Cedar Hollow's unfinished western section. My land had been shaded gray and labeled community access easement. Diane tapped the page with one manicured finger. "This simply corrects the outdated 1989 survey and brings the property line into alignment with current county records." I looked at Martin. "Which county record?" His expression did not move. "The revised development map. That isn't a property record." Diane's smile thinned. She slid another page toward me. The offer looked generous at first glance. The HOA would rebuild my fence, replace the trees, install decorative landscaping, pay me $18,000 for inconvenience and legal closure. Then I read the smaller paragraphs. The agreement granted Cedar Hollow permanent access for vehicles, underground utilities, drainage infrastructure, road construction, and all future development phases. It also prohibited me from discussing the dispute with residents, lenders, contractors, or public agencies. They were not offering to correct a boundary. They were buying my silence before anyone examined it. "You'll want to sign today," Diane said. "The board meets Monday. I'll have my attorney review it." Martin folded his hands. Delay may complicate matters. Outside, wind pushed a loose strip of orange ribbon against the workshop window. Tap, tap, tap. "What kind of complications?" Diane answered before Martin could. "Your fencing operation appears commercial. Cedar Hollow has received complaints about noise, truck traffic, and material storage. My business predates the subdivision. That doesn't make it compliant." She walked toward the wall where my contractor's license hung beside a photograph of Dad and me setting fence posts. "One complaint to county zoning could trigger an inspection," she continued. "Maybe several." There it was. The offer had failed, so the threat stepped out from behind it. I picked up the agreement and studied the site plan again. Near the lower corner, half hidden beneath Martin's legal pad, a larger title was printed in red. Cedar Hollow Western Expansion, 42 luxury homes. I pulled the page free. Diane reached for it too late. The plan showed a two-lane entrance across my eastern field, utility trenches beneath my cedar row, and a stone monument standing exactly where the original copper marker was buried. "You told the neighborhood this was emergency access," I said. "It serves multiple community purposes. You already sold these lots." Silence filled the workshop. Martin closed the folder. No one said anything about sales. But Diane's eyes had shifted toward the door. That told me enough. The lender inspection was coming. The development needed legal road access. Without my signature, 42 luxury homes sat behind a strip of grass they could not cross. I placed the agreement back on the bench. $18,000 is your final offer?" Diane relaxed, mistaking the question for weakness. "We might discuss a modest adjustment. I'm not negotiating." Her face hardened. "You need to understand something, Mr. Warren. Progress does not stop because one man is emotionally attached to an old fence." I looked past her at the fallen cedar outside. "No," I said, "but fraud usually stops when someone measures it." Martin stood first. Diane gathered the papers, but her hands moved faster now. One page slipped from the folder and landed near my boot. A bank inspection schedule. Monday, 8:30 in the morning. She snatched it up, turned, and walked out without another word. I watched the white SUV disappear down my driveway, then picked up my father's brass level. Diane had given me 48 hours, not to save 12 feet of land, to expose the reason she needed them before the bank arrived. By Monday morning, Diane had turned me into the villain. My phone started vibrating at 6:41. First came an email from a longtime client canceling a fence installation in Cedar Hollow. Then another. By 7, 3 jobs were gone. The message was always polite. "Given the current dispute, we feel it's best to postpone." Current dispute. That was Diane's phrase. Outside, fog lay low across the field. The broken cedar still rested beside the workshop, its branches dark with rain. From the subdivision came the hiss of sprinklers and the distant beep of a construction truck backing toward my boundary. Then my neighbor, Tom Reeves, called. "You should check the Cedar Hollow page." Diane had posted a photograph of herself beside the unfinished western gate. She looked concerned, one hand resting over her heart. The caption said a neighboring commercial operator was blocking emergency access, threatening resident safety, and demanding an unreasonable payment before allowing fire trucks to reach 42 future homes. She never used my name. She didn't have to. By 8 o'clock, strangers were calling me greedy. One woman wrote that men like me cared more about old trees than children. Another suggested the county seize my land through eminent domain. The irony tasted metallic in my mouth. Diane had moved the markers, cut my fence, knocked down my father's cedar. Now I was the threat. At 8:17, a county zoning inspector pulled into my driveway. He introduced himself as Paul Hendricks and showed me a complaint alleging unauthorized commercial operations, excessive vehicle traffic, hazardous material storage, and illegal drainage modifications. For separate violations. All filed Sunday night. At exactly 8:30, a black sedan stopped beside Cedar Hollow's unfinished gate. A man carrying a leather portfolio stepped out, shook Diane's hand, and began photographing the new access road. The lender inspection. The complaint against my workshop had never been the main attack. Diane had used the inspector to keep me occupied while the bank examined an entrance built across my land. I've had this shop licensed for 17 years, I said. Paul glanced toward the road, where Diane's white SUV sat parked near the construction entrance. I'm just following the complaint. He walked through my workshop, photographed my lumber racks, checked the fuel cabinet, and measured the distance between my equipment yard and the property line. The new property line. I pointed toward the copper marker beneath the orange stake. That line was moved. He studied it, but did not crouch. You'll need a license survey. I have the original survey. Original doesn't always mean current. Diane could not have written the sentence better herself. Before Paul left, he handed me a notice requiring a formal compliance review within 10 business days. Until then, any county contract tied to my business could be suspended. The paper felt damp between my fingers. She wasn't trying to beat me in court. She was trying to starve me before I reached one. At 10, Deputy Aaron Mills arrived with 2 officers and a copy of the boundary line agreement. The document carried my name, my address, a notary seal, and a signature that looked almost right. Almost. The final stroke curved upward the way mine did. The first letter leaned forward. Someone had copied it carefully, but the date was from 8 months earlier. That day, I had been in Tennessee installing livestock fencing for a state park. My fuel receipts, hotel bill, and work logs could prove it. I never signed this, I said. Mills looked from the document to Diane, who stood beside the construction crew. She says you did. She's lying. This appears to be a civil matter until forgery is established. Behind him, workers poured concrete into forms along the stolen strip. I called Nathan Cole, the property attorney whose number Tom had given me. Nathan filed an emergency request to stop construction before noon. At 4:30, the duty judge declined to issue an emergency restraining order without a full hearing. The HOA had produced a recorded agreement, a notarized signature, and a revised development map. I had an old survey and photographs of buried metal. Until a licensed surveyor verified the original boundary, it was not enough for immediate relief. Rain began just after sunset. I sat in the dark workshop with Dad's brass level on the bench and watched water crawl down the windows. At 11:53, one of my new trail cameras sent an alert. A figure in a reflective vest was kneeling beside the eastern boundary. He worked fast, driving a shovel into the mud around the copper monument. His face stayed hidden beneath a hood. Then a car door slammed beyond the trees. A white SUV engine started. By the time I reached the field, the man was gone. The hole remained. So did the orange stake. But the copper marker beneath it had disappeared. I stood in the rain, mud filling my boots, staring at the empty place where the truth had been buried for 34 years. Diane had stopped pretending this was a mistake. Now she was destroying evidence. Rachel Monroe arrived Tuesday morning with a field technician, 2 tripods, a steel case, and the expression of someone who trusted numbers more than people. Deputy Mills followed in his cruiser. The rain had stopped, but the field still smelled of wet clay and crushed cedar. Water collected inside the hole where the first copper marker had been. The orange stake beside it leaned slightly in the mud, bright and dishonest. Rachel knelt without touching anything. Whoever removed this knew what they were looking for, she said. She photographed the hole, measured its depth, then opened her equipment case. Inside sat a survey receiver, polished rods, marking paint, and enough precision to make Diane's paperwork nervous. Mills watched from the fence line. Diane watched from farther away. Her white SUV was parked beside the unfinished gate. She stood with Martin Bell and 2 board members, all 4 of them pretending they were there by coincidence. Rachel did not begin with my father's survey. That surprised me. Instead, she set her first instrument beside a county control monument half a mile north of my property. Then she located a second reference point near the creek bridge. Old markers can disappear, she said as we crossed the wet grass. Coordinates don't. The receiver gave a soft electronic chirp. She entered measurements. Checked elevation. Moved again. For 6 hours, we followed a line no one could see. She used the county monuments, the creek bend, the stone corner near the southern pasture, and the handwritten elevations from Dad's yellow notebook. Every number pulled the boundary back into focus. By noon, we found the second copper cap beneath 3 inches of soil. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each one sat exactly where the 1989 survey said it should. Each orange HOA stake stood 12 feet beyond it. Not 11 feet, 9 inches. Not 12 feet, 4 inches. 12 feet, 0 inches. 7 times. Rachel stared through the scope toward the final stake. Natural survey error doesn't repeat perfectly, she said. This was laid out from a calculated offset. In English, someone took the true boundary and moved the entire line 12 feet on purpose. The wind pushed cold air through my jacket. Across the field, Diane folded her arms. Rachel kept working. By late afternoon, red flags marked the original boundary. The line cut through the concrete forms already poured for Cedar Hollow's entrance. It crossed beneath a retaining wall, clipped the drainage trench, and ran directly through the foundation of the stone monument Diane planned to unveil. Nearly every piece of the western gate sat on my property. Rachel calculated the total encroachment. Just under 17/100ths of an acre. Barely 1/6 of an acre on paper. Enough land to destroy a multi-million-dollar project. She showed me the access plan on her tablet. Without the stolen strip, Cedar Hollow's new road stopped 12 feet short of the county right-of-way. No legal connection. No approved emergency route. No utility access. No lender-compliant entrance for 42 luxury homes. Then she traced the drainage elevations from Dad's notebook. The stormwater pipe beneath their proposed road had also been designed across my land. If the county recognized the true boundary, the entire system required new engineering, new permits, and my written easement. Diane had not stolen a decorative strip beside a fence. She had stolen the only piece holding her project together. Nathan arrived before sunset carrying copies from the county recorder's office. He placed the boundary line agreement on the hood of my truck and pointed to the filing stamp. This was recorded 3 days before the HOA closed its infrastructure loan. Rachel stopped packing. How large? 4.8 million. The cold settled deeper into my chest. Nathan turned another page toward me. The loan documents listed Cedar Hollow's western entrance as completed legal access. The board had used that claim to secure financing. They borrowed against property they didn't own, I said. Nathan nodded and submitted a forged agreement to make it look legitimate. Behind us, an engine started. Diane's SUV rolled away from the gate, slow at first, then faster once it reached the county road. Rachel drove a red survey flag into the ground beside the nearest concrete form. The plastic snapped in the wind. The field evidence is conclusive, Rachel said. Give me until morning to finish the calculations and certify the plat. One survey had confirmed my boundary, but the 12 feet Diane moved had uncovered something far larger than trespassing. It had uncovered the foundation of a bank fraud scheme. Nathan told me not to touch the gate. That was harder than it sounded. For the next 2 mornings, I watched trucks roll across my land as if the survey had changed nothing. Concrete mixers growled beside the cedar line. Steel forms clanged in the cold air. Fresh asphalt spread across the stolen strip, black and steaming, covering 34 years of truth beneath 3 inches of pavement. I wanted to block the road. Nathan wanted something better. Diane thinks this is still a boundary dispute, he said. Let her keep thinking that. We sat inside my workshop with Rachel's certified survey spread across the bench. Dad's brass level rested beside it. The bubble sat perfectly centered. Nathan marked 5 recipients on separate envelopes. The clerk of the Circuit Court's Land Records Office, the County Building Department, Cedar Hollow's insurance carrier, the general contractor, and First Commonwealth Bank. Each envelope contained the same thing. Rachel's signed survey, photographs of the original monuments, the forged agreement, and formal notice that the western entrance crossed private property. I watched him seal the bank copy. What happens when they get this? They freeze before they speak. That afternoon, the Circuit Court Clerk's office accepted Rachel's certified plat for recordation. By 3, the building department had opened a permit review. By 5, the contractor's attorney had called Nathan twice. The bank stayed silent. That silence told us the most. I installed 4 infrared cameras along the eastern line. One watched the remaining copper markers. One covered the drainage ditch. Another pointed toward the gate. The last faced the place where Diane parked her SUV whenever she wanted to supervise theft from a safe distance. Rachel fitted 2 monuments with tamper seals and small motion sensors. If anybody disturbs these, she said, your phone will know before the dirt settles. We did not announce any of it. At the next HOA meeting, Diane told residents construction was proceeding on schedule. She called my survey an unverified private opinion. She claimed the bank had reviewed everything and remained fully supportive. Then she scheduled the Western Gate dedication for Friday. She needed the final loan draw before the month ended. Wednesday night, my phone rang from a blocked number. The man on the other end spoke quietly. "My name is Gregory Hale. I'm the Cedar Hollow treasurer." I looked toward the dark field outside. "What do you want?" To stop pretending I didn't know. Gregory met me an hour later behind a closed hardware store. He arrived in an old blue sedan, not the luxury cars the other board members drove. His hands shook as he passed me a flash drive. Inside were emails, loan documents, and board minutes that had never been shown to residents. One message from Diane carried the subject line "Legacy Markers." "Move them before the lender inspection," it read. "Once access is certified, the old line becomes irrelevant." Another email instructed Martin Bell to prepare the correction agreement using a signature taken from one of my old county permits. Gregory swallowed hard. "I signed the loan authorization," he said. "Diane told us the land issue had been resolved. All of you signed. 4 board members personally guaranteed the infrastructure debt." That explained the panic. If the bank called the loan, Cedar Hollow's residents would not be the first people exposed. Diane and the other directors would be. Gregory looked toward my truck as if he expected someone to be watching. "There's also a private company," he said. "Whitmore Development Holdings. Diane, Martin, and 2 board members own it. They planned to buy the 42 lots from the HOA after the entrance raised the value. The gate was never about community safety. It was a machine built to turn stolen land into private money." Thursday morning, Diane called me. Her voice had lost its sweetness. $250,000, she said. "You signed the easement, withdraw the survey, and this ends today." Rain tapped softly against the workshop roof. I looked at the brass level on the bench. "Why would you pay me $250,000 for 12 feet you say you already own?" The line went silent. Then she hung up. I stood there listening to the dead tone, knowing Diane had finally understood what the survey had done. It had not just found my boundary. It had found the exact point where her entire board could break. The tamper alarm hit my phone at 2:17 Friday morning. One sharp vibration, then another. I was already awake before the third. Rain hammered the workshop roof hard enough to drown out the wind. The field beyond the windows flashed silver each time lightning broke over the ridge. On my phone screen, camera 3 showed 3 figures moving along the eastern boundary. Reflective jackets, shovels, a portable concrete saw, and Diane Whitmore standing beneath a black umbrella. She had come for the last marker. I killed the workshop lights and called Deputy Mills. "Do not confront them," he said. "Keep recording." I watched from behind the glass. Diane pointed toward the red survey flag beside the western gate. Martin Bell crouched near the concrete footing while another man pulled tools from a plastic case. The motion sensor blinked red. One of them drove a shovel into the mud. The copper marker resisted, so they brought out the saw. The blade screamed through the rain. Sparks flashed orange against the wet field. Burned metal mixed with diesel exhaust, and the sharp smell of storm water rising from the drainage ditch. Diane kept looking toward my house. Not once did she look afraid. She believed paperwork had already protected her. She believed darkness would protect the rest. The contractor dug deeper and exposed the brass cap. Russell Grant, Cedar Hollow's vice president, slipped a pipe wrench around it. That was when the ground shifted. A section of the trench collapsed beneath his boots. Mud poured toward the unfinished gate, carrying loose stone and orange flags with it. The stormwater line my father had mapped 34 years earlier had backed up behind the new construction. The stolen retaining wall had blocked the natural flow. Water pushed beneath it with a low, ugly rumble. I grabbed Dad's yellow notebook, found the old relief channel controls, and ran into the rain. "Caleb," Diane shouted when she saw me. "Stay away from this site." My site. The retaining wall shuddered. I crossed the field and dropped beside a rusted bypass while half buried near the ditch. Mud filled my sleeves as I turned it counterclockwise with both hands. The old relief gate lifted beneath the water. A dark surge burst through the secondary channel, and the pressure behind the retaining wall began to drop. The wall held. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Rain streamed from Diane's hair. Her perfect coat was streaked brown to the waist. Then she pointed at me. "He sabotaged it." I almost laughed. Russell was still holding the pipe wrench around my copper marker. The contractor stood beside the running concrete saw. Diane's SUV sat 20 feet away with the rear hatch open. Inside were rolled maps, replacement stakes, and a clean section of pipe designed to cover the hole after the marker was removed. Blue lights appeared through the trees. Deputy Mills arrived first, followed by 2 county units. Nobody ran. There was nowhere to go. Mills walked directly to the marker and photographed the tools before anyone could move them. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. Diane recovered fast. "Emergency drainage inspection." At 2 in the morning? The storm required immediate action. Mills looked at the saw, then at the wrench, then at the stamped copper monument still half exposed in the mud. One officer opened the SUV. He found the real boundary coordinates printed on a laminated map. Beside them sat a signed work order. "Remove legacy monuments before dedication." Diane Whitmore's signature appeared at the bottom. Under a muddy contractor's tarp, the officer found the copper monument stolen from my field Monday night. Russell stopped speaking. The contractor asked for a lawyer. Diane kept talking. She accused me of trespassing, intimidation, environmental damage, and harassment. Her voice rose until it cut through the rain like torn metal. Mills listened without interruption. Then he removed the work order from its plastic sleeve and placed it in an evidence bag. The officers collected the saw, the wrench, the cut tamper seal, the replacement pipe, the previously stolen monument, and the copper marker they had almost removed. They detained all 3 suspects, separated them for interviews, and released Diane several hours later pending a charging decision. No one had been cleared. The forged documents and financial records still required confirmation, and Mills said the evidence was being sent to the Commonwealth's attorney and the Financial Crimes Unit for warrant review. Diane stared at me from beside her SUV. "The dedication is still happening," she said. "Nathan arrived before dawn. When I told him, he looked toward the damaged gate and smiled for the first time all week." "Good," he said. I thought he had misunderstood. He had not. By sunrise, news vans were already parking beside the county road. Diane had invited lenders, contractors, investors, and half the neighborhood to watch her open the western gate. Nathan folded the recovered work order into his case file. "Let her have her audience," he said. I looked at the copper marker resting inside an evidence bag. Diane had spent the night trying to bury the truth. By noon, she would unveil it herself. By 11:30, Cedar Hollow's western gate looked ready for a wedding. White tents lined the new asphalt. A string quartet played beneath a canopy. Realtors carried champagne glasses between folding tables covered in brochures for 42 luxury homes that did not legally have a road. Diane stood beneath a gold banner that read "Progress begins here." Her coat was new. Her smile was back. No one looking at her would have guessed that 12 hours earlier, police had found her standing over a half-cut survey marker in the rain. Nathan and I parked across the county road. I carried Dad's brass level under my arm. "What's that for?" he asked. "Something she'll understand." At noon, Diane stepped to the microphone. Residents gathered near the stone monument. Bank representatives stood beside the general contractor. Martin Bell remained near the rear, pale and silent. Diane thanked the board for its courage. She praised responsible development. Then she called the boundary dispute a minor obstruction created by one unreasonable landowner. People turned when I walked through the crowd. Her smile tightened. "Mr. Warren," she said into the microphone, "this is a private HOA event." A county vehicle stopped behind me. Then another. Rachel Monroe crossed the asphalt carrying a rolled survey map. Deputy Mills followed with an evidence case. Behind them came a building inspector and a woman in a charcoal suit from First Commonwealth Bank. The string quartet stopped playing. The silence was cleaner than any applause. The inspector reached the microphone first. "Construction and occupancy permits for the western entrance are suspended effective immediately." Diane laughed once. A dry, empty sound. There must be some mistake. Rachel unrolled the certified survey across the champagne table. A black line showed the legal boundary. A red line showed the one Cedar Hollow had created. 12 feet separated them from the county road to the unfinished subdivision. 7 replacement stakes were installed at a uniform 12-foot offset, Rachel said. 5 original monuments remain in their recorded locations. 1 stolen marker was recovered from Diane's SUV, and the 7th was found half-cut beside the gate last night. Mills placed the copper marker on the table. Mud still filled the stamped numbers. People began whispering. Diane reached for the microphone, but Nathan stepped forward holding 2 certified letters. The first is from First Commonwealth Bank, he said. All remaining loan proceeds have been frozen while the lender investigates material misrepresentation concerning legal access to this property. One of the board members stumbled backward into a chair. Another whispered, "You said the bank approved it." The second letter is from Cedar Hollow's insurance carrier, Nathan continued. The company has issued a reservation of rights because the allegations involve intentional fraud, forgery, and evidence destruction. That sentence changed everything. The policy might still protect innocent residents, but it would not automatically shield directors accused of deliberate crimes. Gregory Hale emerged from the crowd. His face was gray, but his hands were steady when he gave Nathan a folder. "These are the board emails," he said, "and the private development agreements." Nathan handed copies to the investigators. The emails showed Diane ordering the markers moved. They showed Martin copying my signature from a county permit. They showed 4 board members investing through Whitmore Development Holdings while using HOA assets to raise their private land values. Those same 4 board members had personally guaranteed the infrastructure debt. If the bank accelerated the loan and the insurer denied coverage for intentional misconduct, their homes, accounts, and investment properties could all be exposed. Diane's face lost its color. "This is his fault," she shouted, pointing at me. "He sabotaged this project." Mills removed a tablet from the evidence case. The screen showed Diane in the rain, directing men with a concrete saw toward the final marker. Then came her signed work order. "Remove legacy monuments before dedication." No one whispered after that. Mills folded the tablet beneath his arm and removed a warrant from his jacket. "The Commonwealth's attorney approved the charges this morning." He stepped behind her. "Diane Whitmore, you are under arrest for forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tampering with physical evidence." The handcuffs clicked beneath the gold banner. I walked to the stone monument and placed Dad's brass level across the top. The bubble slid hard to the left. I looked at Diane as Mills guided her toward the cruiser. "You built everything on a crooked line." Within 90 days, Diane and 3 board members had filed for personal bankruptcy. The gate remained closed. The loan collapsed. And the survey that cost me $4,200 destroyed a board that had gambled millions on 12 stolen feet. 6 months later, I drove the first new fence post into the exact hole my father had marked in 1989. The hammer struck steel with a clean, honest ring. No excavators answered. No concrete saws screamed through the trees. Only wind moved across the field, carrying the smell of cedar, cold soil, and fresh-cut lumber from my workshop. The western gate was gone. The county had ordered Cedar Hollow to remove the stone pillars, tear out the illegal asphalt, and restore the drainage channel. For 3 weeks, crews worked under supervision, pulling apart the same entrance Diane had unveiled beneath white tents and champagne glasses. I watched without celebrating. Most of Cedar Hollow's residents had never known what their board was doing. They had paid dues, raised families, and trusted people who wrapped private greed in words like safety and progress. They deserved accountability. They did not deserve ruin. Nathan helped the residents petition the court for an independent administrator. HOA funds were separated from Whitmore Development Holdings. The 42-home expansion was canceled, but existing homeowners kept their houses and community services. A new board was elected in a meeting so crowded people stood along the walls. Gregory Hale testified first. He resigned afterward. Before leaving, he returned every document he had taken and apologized to the residents whose trust he had signed away. The new board published every contract, every invoice, and every meeting vote online. They canceled the retaliatory complaints against my business and reimbursed the $4,200 I had paid Rachel for the survey. They also covered my legal fees. The 3 Cedar Hollow clients who had canceled their projects called me back. I completed every fence before winter, and this time, each homeowner stood beside me while I measured the line. Diane's $4.8 million gamble ended exactly where her forged paperwork had begun, in court. The bank began foreclosure proceedings against Diane's investment properties. The court froze accounts connected to the development company. Martin's law license was suspended pending disciplinary proceedings. 2 former board members sold their homes while their bankruptcy cases moved forward. The civil consequences came first. 14 months after the gate dedication, Diane accepted a plea agreement. Forgery, bank fraud, evidence tampering. The same woman who once told me progress could not be stopped by an old fence finally had to explain to a judge why she had moved 7 boundary markers to make millions. Deputy Mills called me after sentencing. "You were right to keep the cameras running," he said. I looked through the workshop window toward the red survey flags still standing in the grass. Documentation beats volume. Dad would have liked that answer. The restoration crew saved what they could from the fallen cedar. Most of the trunk had split beneath the excavator, but one section remained straight and solid. I milled it into 4 thick boards. 3 became a workbench. The 4th became a small sign beside the eastern boundary. Private property. Survey recorded 1989. Restored 2025. Rachel returned to certify the final line. She checked the county monuments, measured the coordinates, and set a new protected cap where the stolen marker had once been. This time, we placed it inside a steel sleeve anchored below the frost line. I lowered the original copper cap into the sleeve myself. The surface still carried scratches from the pipe wrench. Evidence of what had happened. Proof that it had survived. When the last fence rail was secured, I carried Dad's brass level from the workshop and placed it across the top. The bubble drifted once, then settled perfectly between the lines. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, standing beside my father with mud on my boots and both hands wrapped around a tool I was afraid to drop. A fence is only honest when the line beneath it is honest. I finally understood that he had never been talking only about land. He was talking about character. Diane believed power could move a boundary 12 feet. She believed polished paperwork could replace truth, and enough money could make theft look official. She was wrong. Power can move paper. It can frighten neighbors, silence workers, and buy temporary obedience. But it cannot change where the truth is buried. Once the truth is measured, the line stays where it belongs. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like one hammer striking one fence post on a quiet morning. Smart, patient, inevitable,